like to welcome my guest to the program, Gilad Atzmon, author and political commentator out of London, and Kevin Barrett, author and Middle East expert out of Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you both for being with us. Well, let's start this off in Madison. And Kevin, how significant is the level of corruption when Netanyahu has even been indicted while in office? And were you surprised by this indictment or not?
Well, I guess I'm surprised to see the Israeli government and the authorities there doing something about Bibi Netanyahu after all these years. He's been a problem for a lot of people, including a lot of people inside the Israeli government since he got his start in politics, and especially since he took over. And he's been running Israel through most of the so-called war on terror era that was launched after the false flag event of September 11th, 2001, which was a kind of joint effort of people in the U.S. Deep state and the Israeli deep state. And his extreme corruption extends to alleged participation in, actually some say hands-on participation in the September 11th atrocities, the controlled demolition of the World Trade Center. And his policies since then have been those that 9/11 was intended to produce, which is a kind of extreme acceleration of the war on Palestine and the war on the entire region. The Oded Yinon plan to bust up the region into little pieces based on ethnic and sectarian enclaves has been put into practice, and the United States, with its massive, overgrown, and not entirely fully competent, as to the extent that it's funded, military into this effort to make them excellent. Of course, Netanyahu has done all sorts of horrific, immoral things, and many non-strategic things as well. He's been pushing for war on Iran for many years. He almost got Dick Cheney to rig up a false flag in 2007 to launch the war. Nuclear weapons were stolen from Minot, North Dakota, here in the United States.
And stay with me, Kevin, because I want to stay on track. Let me get Gilad in on this conversation. Do you think that Netanyahu will be forced out of office?
It is a very big question. It is very difficult to determine where we are going from here. We have to understand the situation in a quite a wide perspective. To start with, I believe that we have to commend the Israelis or the Israeli legal system for its ability to confront their leaders and to indict them. It's not the first time. We saw Ehud Olmert, the former prime minister, behind bars. The president, Katsav, was jailed for sex predatory crimes and so on and so on. It's a very big battle, what we see now, that we'll have to determine whether Israel is a state guided by law, or whether it is a Jewish state, a rabbinic community that is guided by the interests of the rich. There are a lot of people within the Jewish world, within the business world, global business world, that want Netanyahu to stay exactly where he is. He is good for business, for Israeli business, for Jewish business. Israel is involved and is served as a shelter for a lot of dirty money worldwide. The next question that we have to ask ourselves is what will happen in the Likud party. I didn't see the video that you presented, but I could hear it. We could hear Gideon Sa'ar. We will have to find out very soon whether the Likud is a political party, or is it maybe a proto-fascist setting that is built to serve one man, namely Benjamin Netanyahu, who already operates as a king? Now, the most important question, and I'm sure that my friend Kevin Barrett, Kevin, nice to meet you here in Iran. again. The most important question that we have to ask ourselves is where Israel is going, or where is Netanyahu going to lead us from this point? Resigning from politics, from his party, from the government, is very, very dangerous for him, because he will lose the political
spotlight
votes that facilitate his immunity.
Mm-hmm.
A new election could be very risky for Netanyahu at the moment as things stand. And the most terrifying thing that I can think about is that the only thing that can save Netanyahu's career at the moment is a mini World War III in the region. And this is very frightening for me. And we already saw in the last week, we see it for over a year, for maybe some people would say many years, that Israel, and especially Netanyahu, is pushing for escalation with Iran.
Okay.
We saw quite a serious escalation in the last few weeks. I have a feeling that some people around Netanyahu knew what the Attorney General was about to come up with. And the next question is whether the Israeli military, the IDF, the IAF, will be strong enough to prevent Netanyahu from pulling Israel into
Well, stay with me, Gilad. Stay with me. Of course, you've asked a few questions, and I appreciate it. But let me put it back in the direction that I wanted to look at right now. And Kevin, in general, because we heard Gilad talk about a few different possibilities. One of them, of course, trying to exacerbate tensions in the region and perhaps initiate a war. I want your perspective on how likely do you think that is a possible scenario? Or is it possible that his own Likud party will basically try to get rid of him in order to save the party and in order to try to actually form a government this time around?
Well, I don't know about the Likud party. I'm not a scholar of Israeli politics, but I have read a number of things about Netanyahu's activities over the past decade, and he did push things very close to war in Iran. Not only, I mentioned 2007, but on since then, several times, he was stopped by his own cabinet, by the top leadership of the Israeli military and intelligence services, who despise him, and I think there is going to be pushback. I hope there's some in his own party, but as Gilad suggested, if he's in power, he has the levers of power to pull to keep himself out of prison. And this is a major issue. This is why we have a parallel in the United States right now, where if Trump leaves the White House, he may end up in prison. In 2004, George W. Bush had to be reelected. If not, the war crimes would have led to his being thrown in prison. And so he stole the election. They rigged the election in 2004. There's a vast literature on this. So people will do crooked things to stay in power, especially if they know that if they lose power, they could be prosecuted and imprisoned. And that is the situation that Netanyahu's in. Now, so far, he's faced pushback when he has tried to get a big Middle East war going, mainly by targeting Iran. He's gotten pushback from within the leadership in Israel itself. And I assume that those same people who've pushed back and prevented that are still around and are not very happy with the idea of this maniac dragging the region into a huge war that could lead to the destruction of Israel, all to save his political career and to save himself from a greatly deserved prison sentence.
Well, Gilad, in your perspective, how much of a difference does it make to Palestinians themselves who is prime minister in Israel? Does it make a difference?
I am holding the position that is very similar to Gideon Levy, the veteran humanist who writes for Barrett. I think that actually the position of Netanyahu on the Palestinians, the issues, is very clear. It is consistent with America, because America is now operating as an Israeli colony anyway. When it comes to Palestinian politics, it has been announced more than once that actually the Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, they prefer Netanyahu because they know what they are up against. They know very well his modus operandi. They know that he is very reluctant to really attack Gaza. He knows how dangerous it is. He knows how dangerous the situation in the Middle East is. They feel very comfortable with him. On the other end, the so-called opposition party, blue and white, Kahol Lavan, Gantz, is a party of three, led by three Israeli IDF commanders. At least one of them is a right-wing zealot. The others would have to prove how patriotic they are by killing Palestinians and flattening Gaza. For the Palestinians, I think, it is more than reasonable to guess that actually blue and white, Gantz, Kahol Lavan, are more dangerous than Netanyahu. This is something that people have to understand. We like to think about the idea of left and right, which are obviously completely irrelevant terms anymore. But in Israel, there is no such a thing as left and right. The Israeli most leftist party is still a right-wing Zionist, expansionist party. In Israel, the only left universalist, humanist body is the Arab United List. And by the way, and this is something that we have to commend Israel for it, the Arab List, Arab Palestinian Party, is the third biggest party in the Israeli parliament. If there will ever be in this Knesset an Israeli national unity government, it is quite clear that this Arab party will be the leader of the opposition. And I think that this is quite a substantial development in Israeli politics. The Arabs and the Palestinians are now a political force.
Well, what about that, Kevin? What about the point that Gilad just made about the significance of that? Do you see it in the same light or not? Kevin, are you with me?
Well, I agree with Gilad that there isn't really... Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm talking about the Arab opposition party.
I agree with Gilad. Right. Yeah, I agree with Gilad that the Arab opposition party is the only thing that's a left or even a center left in Israel. They don't have anything other than a kind of messianic, millenarian Zionist project representing the vast majority of Jews in Israel. And we saw polls that virtually 100% of Israeli Jews supported cast lead, supported white phosphorus being dropped on civilians. So the population of Israel is in a very problematic position. And the fact that the only liberal humanist party in Israel is made up of this despised, outcast, marginalized minority of Arabs tells you really everything you need to know about the Zionist project. And so I do agree that the Palestinians are probably not going to do much better and could easily do worse under a non-Likud government for this reason, that the demographics and the ideological trend in Israel among the Jewish population is towards extremism and towards racism and towards genocidal thinking. And that's a problem that isn't going to be solved from within the Israeli political system itself. The world is going to have to say no to Israeli apartheid and Israeli genocide.
Well, Gilad, what has been the problem? I mean, if elections take place again, it's going to be the third elections in a year. Why hasn't the Israelis, why haven't these various political parties been able to come together to actually form a cabinet, to form a government? And why is it that Netanyahu appears that he would prefer actually not having a coalition government with Gantz to actually having an election again. Tell me about that side of things.
It is a very interesting question because, as we already discussed, there is no ideological dispute between Gantz, Lieberman, and Netanyahu. They are ultra-militant Jewish nationalists. The debate, as we see it now, is and this is quite a crucial debate, is whether Israel is the state of the Israelis or whether it is a Jewish state.
And how do you see it?
And it is very clear that Netanyahu, who actually was raised as a secular Jew, realized at a certain stage that the biggest unifier within the Israeli state is Jewishness. The biggest unifier within the Jewish population is the Jewish unifier, and this is where he started to push for Israel identifying itself as the Jewish state. This is why last year we saw the Israel National Bill, which is basically a Jewish racist element installed in the core of the Jewish law, and so on and so on. And there are some other people in Israel, many Europeans, I would say, that would like to see Israel as a Western country, slightly less racist. I say slightly less racist because it is fundamentally a racist state. And then there is the Arab Party.
30 seconds, Gilad.
Sorry?
30 seconds. Go ahead.
There is the Arab Party that actually speaks about Israel becoming a state of its citizen where it doesn't really matter whether you are Jew or a Muslim or a Christian. If you are born there, if you are part of that environment, you are a citizen, which is the Western way of thinking. So actually, it is the Arab Party that is leading the Western ideological thought in the midst of Israeli politics, while all other Jewish parties are pushing for one or another tribal perception.
And 30 seconds, Kevin, do you see any changes on the horizon for the Israeli government? We heard what Gilad said, that basically all the parties are racist. Any chance of any change?
Not in the near term. I don't think so. I really don't think the Arab parties and Arab citizens of occupied Palestine, with their 20% representation, are in a position to force that 80% of the population that is committed to this racist, expansionist, genocidal, millenarian, messianic project to change their minds.
And on that note, so sorry, I appreciate you being with us. We are out of time. I appreciate both of you being with us. Out of London, Gilad Atzmon, author and political commentator, and out of Madison, Wisconsin, author and Middle East expert, Kevin Barrett. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us on another debate right here at Press TV. I'm Marzia Hashemi signing out for myself and all the crew right here in Tehran. Hope to see you next time.